We've got a great program called the Uspire Network, where we bring commercial leaders together in a location and we give them input that provokes, energizes, and transforms. One of the speakers that we use for the Uspire Network is the brilliant Mark Fritz. He travels the world inspiring, motivating, and coaching leaders to drive real change in their businesses. And he's going to share his top 3 tips today on how to do that for yourself. So, Mark, tell us, what have you been doing during the pandemic?
Well, it's like everybody, a lot more things online. I had the opportunity to run a short leadership program for a Spanish resort who was on lockdown and not open during the time. And catching up on a lot of other things that never did before. So I guess that's about it.
Because your normal life is traveling the world doing motivational speeches, isn't it, on leadership?
Yeah, normally I'm on the road at least 35 weeks a year, at least 1 flight or 2 flights and so forth. So it's been very strange to not be in an airport for a few months now. For sure.
So I thought it would be great to get you to share 3 elements of your leadership philosophy, because it's so relevant for so many people right now. And I've got them, of course, behind me. So in that sense, or the other side, in that sense, Mark, let's start with outcome focus, because it's the right time to be talking about that for people now.
Absolutely. You know, especially when you're leading people at a distance, you have to take an outcome focus. You can't see what they're doing. You can't manage activities. And you really need to get them much more focused on the outcome. And as a leader, you monitor progress and achievement. But I think the real place where you see a difference between activity and outcomes is how people decide to have a meeting. You know, often they'll say, I need a meeting to discuss, or we need a meeting to discuss. But discussion is an activity. It's not an outcome. And there's only 3 outcomes for meetings, and that's agreed action, agreed decision, or some type of alignment. So I think in today's world now, with all the remote meetings and things, we have to be very clear on the outcome up front so that we run much better meetings. In fact, think of it this way. You know, if you run a poor meeting, basically people think you're wasting their time. And at a distance, you can't afford to waste people's time.
That's spot on, Mark. Give us an example, because you do this all over the world, and I'm sure you've got lots of companies you've inspired to be much more outcome focused. Give us an example of where that's worked well.
Well, I think, you know, in the ones I coach and so forth is they start talking in terms of outcomes. So they're always talking about outcomes and progress. So the best way, you know, I was working with the Spanish resort too, and you can see the change in the language a little bit. In fact, the biggest thing I always look for is a leader speaking in outcomes or in activities? Because when you speak in outcomes, you're speaking in a language of achievement. When you're speaking activities, you're just getting things done. And I think it shows up in the language of the leader, and that's where I've seen it in the companies I work with.
Thank you, because what's triggering for me, Mark, is this difference between leading and managing.
Exactly.
So that's hugely useful. Thank you. And then in terms of, this is going to be fascinating for everyone because it's written behind me, NIFO leadership. Bring that to life for us.
Well, you know, it's really interesting, but you can't micromanage people at a distance. And, you know, micromanagement comes with a speed limit, right? Because you're operating to the speed that you can tell everybody, you know, what to do. And I think what I learned years ago was a concept called NIFO, which is nose in, fingers out, right? So your nose is in, you know what's happening. You're not surprised by something you should have known, but your fingers aren't in every day. You're not telling your people the answer, because when you give your people the answer, you save them from thinking. If you save them from thinking, you save them from growing. So I found the very best leaders are really nose in, fingers out. And to be honest, it's a great reflection question at the end of each week. Did I live NIFO? You know, was I surprised by something that I should have known because my nose wasn't in? Or am I having to give the answer too many times to a person and I need to really start getting them to think? And so your power for nose in is asking good questions. Okay, you ask good questions, you know what's happening, you learn if you can trust them, etc. Your way to put your fingers in is in using stories and examples, because stories and examples, people psychologically do not feel they've been directly told. So actually you're giving them the answer, but they don't feel that way. And also stories and examples have a context. So they get the idea about what to do, and then also memorable. So they're going to remember them much more than a long explanation. Yeah. So NIFO leadership is important because they take more ownership for their solution than your solution. And if there's ever anything problem with your solution, they just give it right back to you and say, okay, what should I do? Your way didn't work the first time. Yeah.
And Mark, what I love about this is triggering so many things in my brain around what is the impact I have. So whether my title is a leader, I'm certainly trying to influence. So in my questions, am I asking the right questions? Am I asking enough questions? But also in the presence that I bring, which is why I really like this idea of nose in, fingers out, because naturally I'm someone that brings so much enthusiasm. The problem with that demeanor is the shadow of that behavior is restrictive.
Yeah.
And so I love the input you've given around at the end of the week. Reflect on NIFO. How have I been and what impact did it have? That's really triggering a lot for me, because I have a business that I'm working with colleagues, and is my behavior enabling them to take more choices and make more decisions, or is it restricting?
Yeah. It's so important to enable, because, if you can't enable them to do it, it all comes back to you. And that's really what we'll cover on the third point. But, what I found when I really started towards the end of my career in leading, I found that my success is basically doing this. I have to enable the right conversations about the right topics at the right time, and I'm not in the conversation.
Yes.
If I'm in the conversation, then I'm setting pace.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge, Mark. And I know you've got an extensive background in industry as well from this as a leader. How do you unlock a group that, even though you're adopting NIFO, they don't seem to be taking the responsibility and ownership? They seem to just wait for you to lead, wait for you to steer. How do you unlock a kind of defensive group? What are some of your tips in that?
Well, I think the real key for I found is once I know what I want to accomplish as a team, the second thing I'm focused on is what can I make visible, right? In terms of achievement, progress, and everything. Because without visibility, you don't have accountability. And without visibility, you don't have peer pressure. And if all the pressure has to come from you, and there's no obligation for us to help each other and deliver our commitments and things, then it's not focused that way. So I found that you think about this, if I gave you a piece of paper and your name was on this paper, you would see your name within 1 second. There's something about accountability. When you put someone's name next to something that needs to be achieved or progress, they're much more accountable. And I think what I found is try to make many things visible, because, people that deliver very well and it's very visible to everybody, they feel tremendous pride, and they'll just live off that motivation of the pride. So I think some leaders are afraid of visibility because they think it might create some conflict or whatever. But to be honest, peer pressure doesn't create conflict. The conflict was already in the team. It just makes it more visible. That's all. It just makes it more visible.
Yeah, my brain's saying it's shine a light. It's shine a light on the outcomes, not activities. It's shine a light on the team in terms of stepping up and taking responsibility. But it's also making visible successes, progress, so that it becomes a momentum towards the outcome you set in the first place.
Exactly. You said the key word there is when you're really focused on achievement and progress, you're basically just reinforcing the momentum as you do that. And people with momentum will always want to finish that before they go home and not just say, I'll leave it till tomorrow. Yeah.
So this lends itself beautifully to this piece about who, not how. And certainly when you were working with the Aspire Network, you brought that to life beautifully with a couple of analogies. So do that for us now, Mark. What do you mean by who, not how?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I generated this from an email from one of my clients. He had a huge problem, and he used some advice and so forth. But he sent me an email with the subject line, "My how is who," and he basically said, "This is how I look at my leadership now." But he had a huge problem. His first instinct was to call his best person in and tell them how to fix it. But he heard my voice in his head, so he called his best person in and said, come back tomorrow morning with 2 or 3 options to fix this issue. The person came back. They had 2 or 3 options. They chose one. The person went and fixed the problem perfectly. So my client sent the email to me. He said, I view my leadership as my how is who, right? Because, most people, once they know what they want to achieve, why they want to achieve it, and by when they want to achieve it, they're thinking how. But the most successful leaders think who, right? Because, if you don't have a who is the who? It's you.
It's you.
Right? So, the faster you get a who involved, the faster you get more brain power on something, the better solution you have. Because if you think who by yourself or how by yourself, you're limited by your own knowledge and experiences. And as a leader, if you take the how halfway and then you give it to your people, they think it's yours because you took it too far by yourself. And then, the last thing is the biggest reason here is the faster you get a who involved, the faster you can get rid of it. But I think what I found is the most successful leaders think who, because as you said earlier, your job as a leader is to enable the who, because without a who, the who is always you. Sounds like Dr. Seuss, doesn't it?
It does.
Without a who, the who is always you. But I think that is really the key. I think as a leader, we have to think who right away, not how.
And that really triggered for me, Mark, because we've also been working with another great expert like your good self on leadership. And he was talking to us about a hunting party. So to your point about collaboration, get a group to solve the problem. That's, that delegate to the right people, the right who, but also have a collective collaboration on this is the problem. What is the solution that we think is the right one?
Exactly. I mean, there's 2 reasons to always get a group involved. First, you get better ideas because the diversity of the group covers more of the issues, so you get a better solution. But when you get a group involved to create the solution, they now can implement the solution much faster because they were part of creating the solution. So, a lot of times it's sometimes important to have a little extra people as part of the group because it makes the implementation so much smoother.
So how do you get the balance right then, Mark, between a leader who is delegating to the right who and letting the right person solve the problem, and having this collectiveness that says, let's all talk about the problem? Because it's a really tough balance, isn't it? If the leader is being so collaborative that the group thinks, does he not know what he's doing right now? How do you get that balance?
Yeah, a lot of leaders do that. Say, well, if I don't get involved, what do they think I'm doing and everything? But I think the key is how you divide up sometimes the improvement projects, because I found that the way to give people responsibility to test their judgment and to get people collaborating and other things is give them projects that they have to bring people together to drive. And give small projects to some of your younger people, medium size and big projects, and etc. Because I found that when you always have something changing, people are forced to collaborate in order to implement what has been changed. And also, there's a real big reason why to have multiple size projects, because then you have something changing all the time. And then the organization basically feels that change is normal, right? So some organizations have a big change and then everybody relax for a couple months. Then a big change, then they relax. So I think by having different size projects, you have something changing all the time, and then people feel that, hey, this is just a normal way of working. We're going to be changing something all the time, so we're used to it.
So thank you, Mark, because I'm getting real clarity about how these three things now fit together, because you start with absolute clarity of the outcome. And only then do you start to, nose in, fingers out, because you select the right team to focus on that outcome. Right. And then crucially, you support the who. Yeah. And not get too stuck into the how, because you've delegated that to someone who's perfectly capable of doing it themselves.
Absolutely. And the final thing about the who is you need someone you can trust their decision making, right? Because if you can't let go of decisions, you can't let go, because you can't just make a decision without knowing what's happening. So you have to come down and partially do their job. So what I found is the most important thing you need to interview for, if you expect this person to climb in your organization, is the interview for business judgment, right? I'll tell you, it's a funny one, but it's really, really true. The fastest way for a leader to lose personal life is to lose someone who can make decisions. That's the fastest way to lose personal life as a leader, is when you lose someone who's been making decisions, and now you don't trust the replacement who has to make the same decisions. So then you have to make them.
When I was head of HR for a big Japanese business, global Japanese business, I was asked to recruit for potential. And I used a philosophy that said judgment is the balance of analysis and creativity. Yeah. If you don't have the ability to analyze fast and deeply, as well as have a creative open mind for options, you cannot come up with the right judgment under pressure. So It was a fascinating, very targeted interview. How can we find potential leaders that have that balance?
That's absolutely correct, because I think, they need to be able to see the issue in colors, right? Unless you have the experience and the thought process, you only see black and white. You don't see the problem strong enough, right? There's another thing I found, that is when you interview for judgment or you're working with people, it's important to ask them, what assumptions are they making, right? Because the assumptions are the foundation of their judgment. So, and to be honest, 9 out of 10 of the biggest problems in business is because people coming into it with different assumptions. And the world moves so quickly these days. We don't know everything to be able to make a good decision. Sometimes we can only get 70 or 80%. And then we basically make assumptions on what we don't know.
That really triggered with me. The way I learn is to apply an idea quickly. So your input there, Mark, around ask about assumptions, I'm going to consciously be doing on my phone calls and Zoom calls later on today.
Yeah, so it's so powerful. It's so powerful, because also how would you say, they reveal the depth of their thinking by the quality of the assumptions they state. Because if they can't state assumptions, then probably they haven't thought it through well enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just hope not too many people ask me the same depth of. It will expose the slightly superficial process my brain goes through when you come up with a great idea and there's an energy. Let's just do it. Well, hold on a sec. Let's test some assumptions. I really like that thinking. Yeah. Now, Mark, you and I are similar in the sense that we travel the world to do what we do. I believe you've worked in 50 odd countries. And in that sense, what's your strategy for getting back out there? Because we're starting to unlock now, aren't we, as a society? What's your approach to that?
Yeah, I think what you're going to find on a lot of things now is we're going to have much more of a blended approach, right? And they'll use face-to-face more strategically in terms of that. But I think we're never going back to where we were with all the face-to-face and the travel, and to the extent that we were doing it. I think people are learning now that people can work from home and still be productive in different ways. And so I think it's going to be, I think the best types of working processes in the future will be a blended.
There's no doubt that's true. One of the things I've loved is this ability to coach more. It's become more acceptable to be on a Zoom than have to be face to face. And it means you can have more interactions with your key customers and colleagues. And that has its advantages for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The more frequent contact, because when you have a distance, frequency trumps time. So it's more important to have frequent contact than, big blocks of an hour and things like that. The only thing I found is that there's this need that always everything has to be a video call. Sometimes just quick phone calls without video is a great way to connect with your team. And to be honest, sometimes people aren't used to video. So they're more self-conscious about how they look, and they're not being quite as open as they could be if you were just having a phone conversation where they didn't have to do it. And also, another one, it forces everybody to dress up if they have to be on the video each time, so you never get a chance to relax anyway.
Well, Mark, I dressed up for you, so there's no doubt about that.
I know. I love that shirt. Yeah, it's good.
Thank you. So final tip, Mark, for great leadership at this time. What's your final tip?
I think great leadership is asking versus telling, right? The quality of your questions will drive the quality of your leadership. And, you just can't micromanage now. So you want to get people to take more ownership, and they'll take more ownership of their own words than your words. And so I think that's really key. Ask, not tell.
Mark, thank you so much. And I look forward to the next phase of working with you Spire Network and with our other customers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.